Hello and most welcome to 384. I'm very sorry for my dress up here. It's a bit chilly today and there is no heating currently in work here. I would like to talk today about deconstruction and its effect on the written context or the written discourse. What previously been mentioned is that deconstruction cures the text or make it whole again after polarities has sort of splitted the text into bits, made it less wholesome. And it's when the polarities between truth and false, right and wrong, before and after, and so forth gets too accentuated, the text sort of dissolves itself. The more polarities you have, the less force there is in the text. That's why, for instance, the huge support that Paul de Man did in Belgium during the war, that was first perceived as being very pro-Nazi, actually more or less turned out to be negative to the Nazi jargon, because it was too positive, too much depending on polarities. And that's one of the reasons why criticism seldom comes into the picture when Derrida does his deconstruction. Deconstruction is something broader, more significant, and more helping than criticism or just pure reversal of polarities. Reversal of polarities is something that we shown both in quantum mechanics, Heidegger, already with Edmund Husserl, that great polarities like truth and false and right and wrong, they always either dissolve themselves, they sort of auto-destructs, or they turn into their opposites. And thereby the force of the text, the force of your arguments are being lessened to a great extent. This is the very same as the experiment we did in school when we had an acid and we added something alkaline. What do you get? You get something neutral. Adding too much force to your text, playing too much on polarities in the text, take away the force of the text, makes it less significant, less valuable and workable. We discussed earlier how polarities or divisions within time and space diminish the totality, the holism of what those things could actually be, and that we have in the West a long yearn procedure for taking away these very polarities by playing too much on distinctions, too much on criticism, something we mentioned already in neuroscience. Tona Chimera pointed out that the very positive idea, the idea of positivism, to establish something, and that is actually the foundation for the very philosophy / science method of positivism, is to establish something positive is a diminishing of the scientific evolution, the development. And we have many people who are stranded in these polarities and try to pinpoint one side of the business while forgetting another point. I think an excellent example is the scientist or journalist, as he was called for a while, science journalist Richard Dawkins, who exaggerates the significance of the genes and downplay everything else in a species or a genome. So the only thing that is important is the genome. Everything else is dependent and less important. While when he did this, he was downplaying. He did a Paul de Man on evolution. He made his own texts weaker and weaker, and he weakened his own message. And that is tendencies that Derrida is but he heals them, and thereby showing a method. And I think this is maybe the most interesting part in Derrida. What he shows is a method, something you can actually do, and that you can apply it to so many different strands of knowledge. Whereas criticism stops you right there. It's not the method, it's not workable, and it's too simple to help you develop your skills. Anyone can do criticism. It is not something special, and it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the text, it doesn't help thinking, it undermines knowledge. But the whole problem is far from that easy as I are drawing up here. It has many different levels and degrees, and it doesn't lend itself to really easily explain directly. One needs to get further and further into this problem to understand it more correctly, to deepen and broaden one's level of understanding. But what was something is clear that I mentioned 2 lectures ago, that you can use, or we are using already, space to understand time. We make time by using space, something that Lakoff Johnson showed. Forwards is the future, backwards is the past. Where I'm standing here is the now. This is how we often use it in the West, whereas some other people could do it differently. The future could actually be something behind yourself, because you cannot see the future. It's not visible for perception. Let's see here in some details. I think the best way of approaching Derrida is not head-on always. It's to showing in different way how deconstruction actually can be applied. Deconstruction is not a method you can describe in points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That can never ever happen, deconstruction. It will not lend itself to definition. Neither. There are never going to be any definitions on what deconstruction is. And we redo deconstruction every time, but we can actually use some traits and transfer it from one area to another. And I'm realizing more and more that is extremely helpful. That is something that actually can make things a lot easier. It helps to broaden understanding. Let's see here. I really like Tartan Tolko. He is showing the Dzogchen tradition from Tibet. It is obviously deconstructivist, and it explains everything in a completely different manner. And for each area we go into, deconstruction is going to be different. It is always different. So that, I think, is the obvious sign of a practical method. You learn body/mind to do deconstruction, and you deconstruct yourself in the same manner. Deconstruction is always connected to you getting more into space, your own reality. It affects you on all levels. In chapter 17 of the book Transcending, Limits on Knowledge, which is a very accurate title, it's trying to show how we can get into knowledge by seeing how knowledge itself limits knowledge, and that those limitations need not to be there. And I devised an example for this that I hope could make it clearer. And that will also show what Derrida is pointing to in all of his texts, that the self-limitation of knowledge, and that self-limitation is not a necessary thing. And that is literally a relief for the mind when this deconstruction works fine, when you learn the method and you can understand the text much better. And nota bene, it's never a special reading. That's the negation method. Critical method is always subjective. You will make yourself less understood if you retort to the simple method of just reversing things, which is way too easy. Why would reality be that easy? So you can't just reverse things and then you end up with something you call truth. Man, it cannot be that simple. And of course, it's not. While deconstruction as a method will give you an enormously helpful tool that you can use in all your life. And this is an absolute must to understand. You can use deconstruction in all areas. It doesn't lend itself just to literature. And the more you broaden your actual use for deconstruction, the better it will become. Because it's the visioning itself that sort of limits knowledge. Well, let me give you an example here. The method of counting, geometry are things that I mention often. Let's see it this way. We have numbers, we have great use for them. And we also, by using numbers and thinking in figures and measuring things out, we start maybe to think that in between 5 and 4 there can be no space. Either you have 5 or either you have 4. That is how it is in the natural numbers. And I would say that's a limitation. And deconstruction shows that that limitation need not to be. And we do not have to abandon counting either. And this is something that we passed through earlier, and that is that in mathematics there is a stuckedness to the rule of the excluded middle, and that's a limitation of mathematics that is not necessitated by mathematics itself. It's not within mathematics to shy away from the law of the excluded middle. It can actually be opened up. And the same goes for numbers and figures. We can go beyond those limits of knowledge and still use the knowledge. And a very recent example is definitely how in classical physics things can be eased and becoming more lenient with Julian Barber and his method of showing that we do not need to trust in absolute space and time, because they are in the end limitations to what we can do and think. Absolute space is a limitation. It shuts out experience by making everything homogeneous and blocking out our possibility for perceiving space and to be in space. One direct effect of this is, of course, how we see ourselves as two-dimensional today, how we constantly forget about where we are in the world. My backside, what's above me. By letting that coming in, I stride into balance yet once more, and my grip on what I'm holding is getting softer. You can feel it yourself, and please do try it when you hear this. Try to take in what is around you, and the effect is immediate. It doesn't have any lag to it, and I think that goes to show how true it is, how workable and effective space can be. The same happens in the text many times now, especially after the opening of Rudolf Gachet and his marvelous book, The Taint of the Mirror. When I read, I can see and feel a relaxation in the text. And that is literally also relaxation in my eyes while strolling with my gaze over the lines in the book, or whatever book I read. It comes to use in different readings. But let me go into this book, Dynamics of Time and Space by Tartan Tulku, and we are now at page 173. And he is looking into knowledge. He writes like this: when we look around the world that we inhabit, we discover individual entities interacting in various ways. We set about determining their nature and characteristics, making divisions and organizing into territories. We classify and make categories, we refine our initial stance into theory, rules of thumb and philosophies. We project our views out into reality, juxtaposing our opinions and interpretations to establish certainties. We have already explored the underlying mechanism and structures that sustains these ways of knowing. In terms of how we know, however, the fundamental structure relates to the position that we take up in regard to the world, that we observe and make use of. We are bystanders to reality. We stand outside the flow of what is happening, struggling to make sense of it. As bystanders, we start from a position of not knowing and never really advance beyond it. Situated at a distance from what needs to be known, we cannot wholly bridge the gap. Our knowledge is limited accordingly. It is like designing a dress for someone we have never seen, based on descriptions and rumors. We use our best imagination, formulate our best hypothesis, make our best comparisons, and hope that the dress fits. What more can we do? And once our fabrications are put in place, we make new experience accord with them and act on the basis of the values and certainties they proclaim. We act to make our views conclusive, to establish truth, reality, and the absolute. We force the multiple dimensionality of what arises into the mold of what we have already claimed and proclaimed. We let our ideas define our experience and give character and characteristics accordingly. Perhaps appearance itself could lend the mind to knowledge, but that is not our way. Instead, we make what appears follow the lead of the bystander mind. This juxtaposition of what we hold to be true proceeds without interruption. Even though we are constantly asking what is new, we base our lives on what is old and established, on fixed ideas and principles and positions. We embody whatever subjective views are foremost in our minds and interpret meaning and value accordingly. We pursue the course they set and look for further modes of projection. Starting as bystanders, we become bias-standers, maintaining our particular version of reality above all else. So, being a bystander is getting into the model. A model is something we use. The Newtonian system is one, the Cartesian coordinates is another. But that doesn't have to mean that that is the reality we need to inhabit. And it sets up a possible limitation. It's a possibility of a limitation, and that possibility we can step into, and thereby we will limit ourselves. An excellent example is, of course, the rather generalized term of Logocentrism, and that's a fixation in the now and here. But not all things are similar that way. It could be just the opposite. It could be a fixation of being there and tomorrow. It is that polarity that makes this difficulty, because it builds up a tension, and that tension dissolves by itself. We sort of dissolve ourselves, our own definitions, our own markers, and that makes for a less clear view of reality. Everything becomes more or less clouded, unclear, foggy. And obviously, polarity is a way of being a bystander. Think about it this way. You look at something at a distance. When you do that, everything is going to be very sharply defined as either being something or not being something. You make use of what surrounds what you see at a distance. And all of a sudden you can have these great polarities between what is and what is not. But does this actually hold true also for reality? Is it clear when you get closer and closer what is external or what is internal? What is the negative space or what is the positive space? The closer you get into the fabric of reality, and what you rather see is this iteration. Everything reiterates itself rather than being completely disjunct or separated. And it's this iteration that is so typical of what reality is also in knowledge. So small pieces of knowledge can contain larger knowledge. Small gestures can show and heal a whole ocean of libraries. Knowledge can contain with itself. It's not unfair to say that the Klein bottle is also in movement when it comes to knowledge. And our tendencies to disjunct things, to separate them too largely, and set things side by side, that is what creates this knowledge at a distance. And then we are just bystanders to knowledge. We do not get into the depths of knowledge. We are permanently disjuncted from knowledge. And by easing up the polarities, while looking more into what the polarities are, what are the binary positions, what are life, what is death, how come we perceive them to be so absolutely and ever completely disjunct. And when we look closer, we see a net of interrelations that are far more complex and far more interesting, fascinating than the simple disjunct of black and white. And obviously this is so well put by Edward de Bono in his book I Am Right, You Are Wrong. And do not get the idea that if a person say that I am right, you are wrong, he is thereby gaining anything. Look at it closer and there is a loss in force in the argument. Just turning the tables and saying that is my view doesn't necessarily help you. There is no ultimate connection between this reversal and what you are. You are hopefully something much greater than the reversal of a polarity. Just like I really, really hope that existence is something more stable, something more substantial than just the mere negation of non-existence. You see, it makes things superficial, non-trustworthy, reducing God, for instance, to mere existence and saying that is the existence of God I believe in. You make it further and further away, and in the end you're so far away it doesn't really matter which strand you're acting in. Everything is very, very, very far. And that, of course, is often the reading with religious texts these days. You read them at a distance, you're not there in the text, and therefore you don't perceive anything, And I think this blocking out is a perception of an objectivity, lack of interest in the whole thing. I think it's odd though, I haven't noticed that before, but there is actually a picture of fractals here on the cover of the book. Fractals are never mentioned in the book, and I haven't seen them before. Quite interesting. Okay, I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.